Welcome back. It is week 2 of ELPA 6870. And what I want to talk about first today is chapter 3 of the Agresti-Finley book. Thank you to all of you who have handed in your homework. That's awesome. I will grade that this week and get some feedback back to you ASAP this week. So there are 3 sort of buckets of things I want to highlight from this chapter, and the first has to do with tables and figures and how to represent data in ways that are clear to people. And measures of central tendency is the second thing I want to talk about: mean, median, mode, and range. And then I want to talk a little bit about standard deviations and z-scores, but a lot of that from the back end of chapter 3 is more a preview of things to come in future weeks and future chapters, so I don't want to spend a ton of time on that today. But I will start talking about the tables and figures kind of front end of the section and just say a couple things about that. Some of this is just preference, so you're getting this with the Emily lens on it. But I think when it comes to representing data visually in terms of a table or a figure, the simpler, the better. So that's my first rule of thumb. Emily's rules of data visualization, as you will, if you will. The simpler the better, because if people can't figure out what your table is trying to say, they're not going to care about how nice the colors look or like how sophisticated it looks. So the priority always needs to be on clarity rather than like, wow, I found this really cool color template or something like that. One of the lessons I learned a long time ago in grad school was a table should be, or a figure, a table or a figure should be able to stand alone. So if somebody is just like flipping through a paper and they don't have time to read it, so they're not reading the narrative, but they're just looking at the tables and the figures, they should be able to sort of get the gist of what you're talking about by looking only at your tables and figures. So be thinking about that as you read papers throughout this course, or if you move on to more needing to read a lot more in a doctoral program, or even just in your day-to-day, think about how tables and figures within articles, can they stand alone? And how are they presenting the data? Are they doing so effectively or ineffectively? I would say as well, if you look at some of the THEC reports, which I've asked you to do for week 3, if you were to look at some of the back years, you would see that sometimes a table would be presented and then a figure would be presented, and it would be the same information, just presented 2 different ways. So it would be a table of ACT scores and then a figure of ACT scores in a given year. So you don't often need to do that. So that's like another like Emily's general rules of thumb. We don't do that anymore in the reports. You kind of only need one or the other. So if you are putting together a table, you don't need to make a figure. If you're making a figure, you probably do not need to make a table. So make sure they are clear before you worry about colors and design and things like that. And you usually will never need a table and a figure. There are tons of ways to make tables and figures with your data, be they in Excel or SPSS or Stata or with a marker, just to kind of look at what things look like if you're just doing it by hand. I'm not going to get into how to do any of that. There are tons of YouTube videos and tutorials that exist online if you have particular questions about how to do it within a software program. But we use Excel all the time here. I know how to code in Stata, but we typically just use Excel. Here at THEC, I would imagine the same is true for most of you guys, that Excel is going to be the most readily available data manipulation tool. So there are tons and tons and tons of tutorials about how to make really nice looking tables and really nice looking figures in Excel. In terms of the particular types of figures that are presented at the beginning of this chapter, I would stay, and again, some of this is preference, but some of this is just kind of convention. I would stay away from these stem and leaf plots. Nobody actually uses those that I've ever seen. I've never seen those published in an article or really in a textbook other than this one. I would think very much about using histograms, using line graphs, using scatter plots that are mentioned later in the chapter. Those are kind of the more conventional data. I say data visualization. I mean, data visualization has become like its own field, which is far beyond what we're talking about here. So when I say data visualization, I mean like making a figure. So It's a little different. But when you are making figures to represent your data, I would really just stick to kind of the classics, like a bar graph, a histogram, a line graph, a scatter plot if you're showing the association between two variables like the book talks about, and kind of leave it at that. So I think those are all, I'm looking at my notes, those are all the high points about the visualization piece of it and presenting your data visually. And if you give me 2 seconds, I will come right back and we can talk about measures of central tendency.